أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن دين عند الله إسلام وما اختلف الذين أوتوا الكتاب إلا من بعد ما جاءهم العلم بغيا بينهم ومن يكفر بآيات الله فإن الله سريع الحساب. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat to hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب آل Muhammad. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Ali Muhammad. Our discussion in these 10 nights is around the concept of justice and its importance. And we mentioned and we structured the idea that this justice is important to our spirituality. And understanding this justice will ensure that we have the ability to appreciate and to survive through the difficulties we see in society. This justice and understanding it and realizing that we are constantly under the authority and the justice of Allah is something that allows us to face off against the difficulties of life and face off against the challenges of life and not lose our faith in the process. And it's one of those critical elements that, to understand it, will make a difference in your day-to-day life. Which is why the conversation that we want to have today, to begin this discussion of understanding this adala, is why is this adala a part of usul ad-din? Why did adala become one of the things that we mentioned, that when we describe our faith and ideology, that adala is one of the central figures that's mentioned? You see, Allah has many sifat and many attributes, and Allah gives us His attributes to know Him by, and gives us these 99 names by which we can know Allah and build a relationship with Allah. Meaning there are many of these names that are beneficial to us that we can apply to and consider and to know about Allah, yet adala is the one that we choose. Why not His rahmah? Rahmah of Allah is very important. Rahmah of Allah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That whenever we take the name of Allah, we mention that He is merciful and that His mercy is something that we look forward to. And when you read Surah Insan, for example, and you talk about the instance of the Ahlul Bayt giving away their food, they even describe إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. The statement of لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ that's mentioned, that we gave our food away to the orphan, to the prisoner, to the traveler, is on the principle that we wanted to see or achieve the face of Allah, and that face of Allah is His mercy. Because the mercy of Allah is what we recognize somebody by, is what we recognize Allah by, and that's why it's referred to as the face of Allah. For example, the most notable attribute that exists in a person is their face. That's how you recognize someone. Allah describes and He says, the wajh of Allah, the face of Allah, is His mercy that remains in every situation. Yet if you take a look and you see that that's not the attribute that we list when we list our usul ad-din, we list it as tawheed, adalat, nabuwat, imamat, and ma'ad. Why couldn't it have been one of these other attributes? What's very interesting is that Allah Himself tells us to invoke Him through His attributes. One of the ways that we invoke Allah is through, for example, His attributes when we use, for example, du'a mashlul. We're going to take an aside here. Everybody's okay? You guys know about du'a mashlul and the importance of it? Let me tell you about du'a mashlul. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The narration of du'a mashlul is very important. It's very interesting. Dua Mashlul is a dua that was given to us, and the narration behind it comes back from a story that comes from Imam Hassan, who says, I was with Amir al-Mu'mineen, and we saw, and my father heard someone crying out in pain, and he sent me to go look and see. And when I went to go look and see, I came back and said, oh father, there's a young man who is suffering from shalal, from paralysis, and he's sitting there and he's crying. So Amir al-Mu'mineen says, let's see what he needs. So Imam Hassan narrates, he says, I went with my father to see this young man. And we went there and we asked him, what's your condition? Why are you crying? What's the problem? He replies and he says that when I was younger, I was someone who was busy in ma'siyah and sin. And my father was a very pious man. And I would go so far as to continue my sinning. I would even abuse my father. And it happened that at one point in time, my friends who were busy in this ma'siyah with me and this sinning with me, they wanted to go on a trip. And I wanted to go with them. But I had no money, so I went to my father to ask him. I said, Father, give me some money, I want to go on a trip. And my father said, no, because I know you're going to go commit sins, I won't give you the money. So I said, you know what, I know where the money is, I'm going to go take it. My father tried to stop me. I pushed my father, and I took the wealth and I left. At this moment, my father had enough with me. He says, now I'm going to pray against you. I went on my trip. My father went to the city of Mecca. When he went to the city of Mecca, he stood in front of the Kaaba, raised his hands and prayed to Allah against me. And as soon as he made this dua against me, my body became paralyzed. And since that day, I have been paralyzed. When my father came back, I cried, I wept in front of my father. I said, Father, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. My father said, you know what? No, I don't forgive you. I'd rather you be in this condition with this paralysis than that Allah cures you and you go back to the way you were. So I spent a long period of time like this until eventually my father saw that truly my character had changed and he decided to forgive me. So my father took me and we headed to Mecca, and he says, we'll go to the Kaaba, and again with you now I will raise my hands in dua and Allah will inshallah forgive you. In this situation, as we were going to Mecca, a bird came and scared the mount that my father was on. My father fell off of the mount and he died. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, now I have no wasila, there is no way for me to be cured because my father who prayed against me. And this is a really important element, by the way. The prayers of our parents are one of the du'as that are answered. And this young man, his father prayed against him, and this was his condition. So he says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, now my father has left this world and he never had the chance to pray in my favor. Is there any way that I can be cured? Is there any wasila that I can be helped in this situation? And Amir al-Mu'mineen describes and he says, yes, certainly there is. And he teaches this dua mashlul. Dua of the one who has shalal, the one who has paralysis. And one of the instructions Amir al-Mu'mineen gives him is he says, perform wudu, then recite this dua, and inshallah by the wasila of the names of Allah in this dua, you can be cured. Now one of the things that's interesting is that this dua is known as dua mashlul, the dua of the one who is paralyzed. But it doesn't mean that you have to be paralyzed to benefit from the dua. Instead, what it points to is to say that even if your condition was so bad that you had paralysis, that you could achieve shafa'ah by the wasila of this dua, and that this is one of the important tools that we possess to find the fulfillment of the hajat and fulfillment and removement of difficulties in our lives. But within dua mashlul, what is this? The secret of it is it possesses within it the sifat of Allah. The Isma' Azam, the names of Allah that you are asking by their wasila that Allah removes your difficulties. Meaning that all of the names of Allah have barakah and khair in it. All of the attributes of Allah have barakah and khair in it for us. And which is why all of these names are beneficial to us, and that's why the question comes, why would you then include adala and not include one of these other sifat of Allah to build a connection with Allah and to build a relationship with Allah? Especially considering the fact that when you look at the idea of rahmah and adala, there is no mu'min who will say that, oh Allah, treat me with your adala, not with your rahmah. As a matter of fact, our du'as are the other way, that they say, oh Allah, treat me with your rahmah, not with your adala. Why? The adalat of Allah is scary. Imagine all of the ni'mat and barakat and khair that Allah has given you in your life. if we had to justly account for everything Allah gave us in our life? Did we do haqq with it? Did we utilize every breath of air in the worship of Allah? Every bounty, can we even count it? The attribute that we could never account for all the bounties that Allah gives us, our fourth Imam explains this, and he tells us that he says, "Oh Allah, I have not yet thanked you for the ability of what you have given me the ability to thank you for." That the depth of the blessings of Allah is so great. Yet here, when it comes to the fundamentals of our faith, we turn around and we only invoke Allah, and we say that we count on, after His tawheed, we count on His adala. So why then, with all these importance of rahmah of Allah, mercy of Allah, all these other sifat of Allah, is it that this one is the one that became a part of Usul al-Din? Do you guys know the answer? If you know the answer, I can finish now. No? Alright, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This Usul al-Din, first thing is to understand how important this is. Why is this Usul al-Din important? Islam consists of two elements, faith and action. And faith is defined by this philosophy which is referred to as usul. And furu' is the association of the actions. All of religion is consistent of these two parts. All of the faiths that came before till now have the same usul. Inna deena indallahi Islam. In the verse that we began our discussion with, Allah is declaring and saying that certainly the religion with Allah is Islam. This philosophy of faith has never changed from Adam ila al-Khatam. The philosophy has been the same. The only thing that's changed over time is that Allah gave a new sharia, a new series of laws that would be passed. But the fundamental of the philosophy of faith was always the same. Every prophet that came and every prophet that taught the same things, that believe in tawheed, that there is one Allah, believe in the messengership that connects you to Allah, and believe in ma'ad, that there is a day of resurrection and there is a return to Allah that will hold you accountable for all of your actions. Every prophet preached the exact same religion. It never changed. What changed would be the actions that we would perform. How do you pray? How do you fast? Throughout the Anbiya, each of these actions came to a change. Which is why even today in the religion of Islam, when it comes to these two elements of faith, when it comes to the actions, there is something called taqleed and ijtihad that we have. That to know how to enact the religion of Islam, I can count on someone to teach me, and I can count on the fact that someone who is more knowledgeable can educate me on how to emulate and enact the laws of Islam. But when it comes to the philosophy of faith, when it comes to do I actually believe in Tawheed and Nabuwat and Ma'ad, there is no taqleed. I have to know this myself, and I have to believe in it and understand it entirely myself. It can't be because anyone said. And there's a really smart reason for this, by the way. That when we look at the concept of death, Allah is very organized. Death is not accidental. And the process that Allah prepares for us is amazing and beautiful. Okay, are you guys okay? You ready? This is important now. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Have you ever noticed that when you talk about the Day of Judgment, يَوْمَ نُدْعُ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ, that on that day every person will be called with their imam. Allah doesn't ask you who your imam is on the Day of Judgment. When we look at the sifat and the attributes of the Day of Judgment, you take a look and you see the statement of our sixth imam. He says, أَوَّلُ مَا سُئِلَ بِهِ يَوْمُ الْقِيَامَةِ الصَّلَاةِ إِن قُبِلَتْ قُبِلَتْ مَا سِوَاهَا وَإِن رُدَّتْ رُدَّتْ مَا سِوَاهَا. Imam Sadiq explains, and he says that on the Day of Judgment, the first thing you'll be asked about is your prayers. If your prayers are accepted, if your salat is accepted, everything else will be accepted. But if your salat is refused, everything else will be refused. But nobody asked me who is my Lord on the Day of Judgment. No one asked me who is my Prophet on the Day of Judgment. Because it's already been decided. Allah organized the entire system so that as soon as you enter your grave, you enter a filing system that tells you where will you be raised on the Day of Judgment. Which is why we talk about that as soon as you come to the grave, the first thing that happens is Munkar and Nakir come and question you. Munkar and Nakir don't ask you, did you pray? Did you fast? Did you commit sins? No, they ask you, who is your Lord? What is your book? Who is your prophet? What is your imam? Meaning the filing system at the moment of death begins, and you make a decision immediately as a reflection of your character. Where will you stand up on the Day of Judgment? And you can't change that. It can't happen that when Allah says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ, that you go and you're called and raised on the Day of Judgment with your imam, you look and you say, can I change my line? Can I go to somewhere else? No, it's set. This entire attribute that you have on the Day of Judgment, that judgment, Day of Judgment is asking about actions. Your a'mal. Your iman was established in your life, and it was the first thing you were asked about. Which is why we have this habit of calling talqeen, the last a'mal that we do for the deceased. One of the things that we do is talqeen. That we remind this person who has passed away that, hey, the most important thing you are about to go through is finding out where will you be raised on the Day of Judgment. And for that, know the answers to these questions. If you don't answer these questions correctly, you may not be raised with the mu'mineen, you may not be raised in the nation of Rasulullah, you may not be raised with the imam of your time. This aqeedah, this usul is very important to spend our time in and to think about, which is why the question that we began with, why is adala part of our usul ad-din, is not a simple question. It's a really important question. It's a question that if you understand that what am I preparing for on the Day of Judgment, and where do I want to line up? It's so important that our imam would teach and say that spend your time in studying this usul and in this tawheed and in this nubuwwat and ma'ad, because if you don't really believe it with your heart, when munkar and nakir ask you in the grave, you won't be able to answer them. Why? Because it's a state of fear. Have you ever seen an angel before? Have you ever been dead before? No. You're overcoming all of these tribulations, and in the middle of this, if you don't really believe it in your heart, if you really don't know what you're saying, you won't be able to say it. There's no lip service at this point in time. It's really what you believe. Which is why in this life, it's recommended for all of us to spend time to be able to answer the question yourself. If someone asked you, why do you believe in one God? Can you answer that question? Why do you believe in Nabuwwah? Can you answer that question? Why do you believe in Ma'ad and Qiyamah and the Day of Judgment and resurrection? If I can't answer and explain that question today, what makes you think that when the most frightening experience of your existence, not of your life, of your existence takes place, that you'll naturally be able to talk about this? It's something that's very important to invest in. It's something that's very important to focus on, because it is one of the most consequential elements of your existence. This life is very short. The akhirah is very long. But if this mistake I make, Allah gave us this life to come to the conclusion of what do we believe in, and then enact it. But if you can't figure out what you believe in, there's no way you're going to enact it, and there's no way you're going to be rewarded or punished. But that's the purpose of this existence, is to spend time, which is why you can't say to munkar and nakir, I did taqleed, and when Allah, who is Allah, what Lord do I believe in? My mother told me to say La ilaha illallah, so I said it. It won't work. Our Marja said, believe in La ilaha illallah, I believed it. It won't work. Our Maulana said, believe in La ilaha illallah, so I believed it. No. There it's going to be, do I understand this concept? Do I believe in this concept? There did I apply this concept in my life, which is why now talking about this is so important, and that's why the question is even more important. Why? Why did we attach adala to tawheed? Why didn't we attach rahmah to tawheed? Why didn't we attach his being Malik or his being Sattar al-Uyub? The answer to this comes back to the fact that when society stopped following the true usul ad-din, we had to elaborate that our faith is different. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me explain. We often talk about other sects of Islam in terms of the fiqh that they follow. That, for example, when we say, for example, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, these are fiqh and how they look at Islamic law. And our fiqh is known as Madhab Ja'fari, and our fiqh comes from a different source than theirs. But not just the fiqh, but even their aqeedah comes from different sources. And there are different schools of thought of where aqeedah is established from and where the philosophy of faith comes from. The two most famous sources of faith and philosophy, the two most famous sources of philosophy that exist within the other madahib are famously known as Mu'tazila and Asha'ira. Mu'tazila doesn't quite exist anymore. Asha'ira is the more common process of looking at the aqaid and aqidah of belief in La ilaha illallah. The Mu'tazila school of thought, and this history is very interesting and it's very lengthy, so it's outside of the scope of tonight, but it was basically a way that looked very similar to the way Madhab Ja'fari looks at aqidah. They looked at it in a similar fashion. Asha'ira looked at aqidah differently. And when they looked at the aqidah of Tawheed and Nabuwah, they came to a different conclusion. And they didn't believe it the way that we did. So for example, when they didn't believe in Nabuwah with its condition of imamah, we added imamah to the aqidah to explain that we believe in Nabuwah with the condition of imamah. Imamat and to have an authority of Allah on this earth is one of those fundamentals of religion that a person needs to understand, that if Allah has given hidayah to humanity and guidance to humanity, that guidance didn't end with Rasulullah, but rather that there was an appointed guide, a wasi, a wali, who would continue the process of guiding humanity until the day of judgment. That there has to be someone. There's a verse of Quran that teaches us this as well too, when we talk about the ayah of wilayah. One of those ayat that every mu'min should know. That is in Surah Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 55. إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَالرَّسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَهُمْ رَاقِعُونَ. This verse was an explanation to say that the authority of Allah after Nabuwah continues. That it says that Allah is the authority over you, and then so is Rasulullah and those who keep faith. Who are the ones that keep faith? They are the ones, الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ. They are the ones that stand up in prayer. وَيَأْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَهُمْ رَاقِعُونَ. And they give zakat, charity, when they are in this condition of ruku'. Look throughout history, you will find no one else other than Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam who fits this condition. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This necessity that when humanity left the belief in the source of wilayah after Nabuwah, we dictated and said that we believe in Nabuwah ma'shurutiha, with its conditions, that wilayah has to be established because Allah dictated in the Quran, because Allah said guidance from Him will continue even after Nabuwah. There's a beautiful hadith that talks about this. Do we have time? We have a couple minutes. You guys okay? Anybody falling asleep? No? Somebody's falling asleep over here. All right. This hadith is one of my favorite hadith. It's hadith Qudsi. In it, meaning hadith Qudsi means that Allah is the one who says this hadith to Rasulullah, and then Rasulullah shares it with us. Not everything that was revealed to Rasulullah is Quran. That which is other than Quran that Allah revealed to Rasulullah is called hadith Qudsi. In it, Allah gives the statement, He says, لَوْلَا خَلَقْتُكَ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ مَا خَلَقْتُكُمْ. If I had not created you, Ya Rasulullah, I would not have created the earth. وَلَوْلَا خَلَقْتُ عَلِي مَا خَلَقْتُكُمَا. If I had not created Ali, I would not have either created you, Ya Rasulullah, or the earth. And then it continues. وَلَوْلَا خَلَقْتُ فَاطِمَةَ مَا خَلَقْتُ قَطْ. That if I hadn't created Fatima, I would not have created anything. Some people look at this hadith and they say, how is this possible? That this is amazing. How could something like this be said? This is, na'uzubillah, it's horrible, it's bad. No, look at the reality of what Allah is talking about. When He makes the statement, He says that if I would not have created you, Rasulullah, I would not have created the earth. It's to say that if there was no way for the earth to receive the rahmat of Allah, there would have been no point of the earth to create it and punish it. That Allah created ar-rahmah, so He created humanity so that they could come closer to Allah. Then he continues and he says that if I had not created Ali, I would not have created either of you. Why? Because if after Rasulullah there was no way for us to connect to the mercy of Allah, then we would have been disconnected from mercy, and then after Rasulullah everyone would have been cast into perdition and there would have been no way for guidance. Which is why even Rasulullah gives the explanation. He says, "Lawla anta ya Ali, lam yu'rif al-mu'minuna ba'di." That if it was not for you, O Ali, to show the path to me, there would have been no believer or way to find a believer after I left this world. Now look and see when Allah completes the statement that if I had not created Fatima, I would not have created either of you, is the explanation to say that the sons of Fatima are the guidance to the path of Allah, and Ali ibn Abi Talib who connects us to the path of Rasulullah. If there was no way for us to connect to Rahmatul lil Alameen, then there was no reason for anything to have existed ever from the beginning. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Meaning that this concept of imamat is one of the fundamentals, and when people believed in Nubuwwah but neglected imamah, we stated it within our aqidah to make sure that our aqidah, when we say that I believe in Nubuwwah all the way through, including the concept of imamah, that there's a connection to Allah even after Rasulullah left this world. In the same concept, when we look at the ideologies of the different philosophies of Islam, when they left the concept of adala, we had to state that we believe in Tawheed with the condition of adala. Now understand that when other schools of thought looked at Allah, they said Allah is all powerful. Allah has power, and His being all powerful, Jalla Jalaluhu, is the most important attribute of Allah, such that whatever Allah does cannot be limited. And justice, they saw, is something that limits Allah. Why? They said, well, because of justice, then Allah is forced to put a bad person in hell and a good person in heaven. If Allah is all powerful, then He can put anyone He wants into heaven and put anyone He wants into hell. And they took this idea from a guy by the name of Abu Musa Maturidi. This guy was actually from Persia, before Persia followed the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, and he says, the way I see Allah in the Aqidah, as I explained, is Allah huwa ma yurid, yaf'al ma yurid, or ma turid. That Allah does whatever He wants, and that Allah cannot be stopped from doing whatever He desires, and whatever Allah desires is good, and you can't say Allah will do this and not do this. So they said Allah has the ability to take, for example, the most pious person and put them in hell, and take the most evil person and put them in heaven. And if He does this, then this is the right thing to do. And they explained and said that Allah being all powerful is the most important attribute that Allah possesses. And because of this attribute of being the most powerful, nothing can be brought about that limits the attribute of Allah. And therefore they said justice as a concept does not exist. Whatever Allah does is justice. And they changed the concept. We came out and we said, no. Allah describes His knowledge as being one of the fundamental attributes, and that one who possesses knowledge does not do something qabih, does not do something ugly. Therefore, knowledge dictates that justice is one of the attributes of Allah, because justice is beautiful, because it is something that the intellect likes. Allah, when He does, and He takes a pious person and puts them in heaven, and takes an evil person and puts them in hell, it's not that we're saying Allah is being forced to perform this action. Rather, what we are saying is that Allah's knowledge is so perfect that it is inappropriate to go against that knowledge, and Allah does not let His power overcome His knowledge. This attribute of them confusing what actually are the sifat of Allah, to understand that how do we understand the sifat of Allah, is the reason why we came and we included that we believe in Tawheed with the condition of adala and justice. That Allah does not perform injustice with anyone, because His performing an injustice would be, na'uzubillah, something qabih, something ugly. And that Allah does not do something that goes against the intellect, and does not do something ugly. This entire conversation of the sifat of Allah, if you wanted to understand that it's not an easy thing to understand, how do we organize these attributes? Rather, if you have the chance tonight, go open Nahj al-Balagha and look at the first sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen Nahj al-Balagha. In the first sermon, Amir al-Mu'mineen, in describing Allah, and one of the beautiful things about Nahj al-Balagha teaches you many things, including to know Allah. Every sermon Amir al-Mu'mineen he begins by describing Allah. And in this first sermon, he begins and he describes Allah, and he comes to the conclusion, he says, Allah is that one who possesses every attribute in its perfection. He possesses it in such perfection that it has to be said that he possesses none of these attributes. Do you understand what that means? That means that if to have the perfection of mercy and justice was to exist in one person, you would say you can either be merciful or you can be just. But Allah's representation of justice and mercy is so perfect that it's not sufficient to describe how it is that He looks at and how it is that He treats humanity. That these sifat, while they are a wasila for us to connect to Allah, they have no ability to truly encompass what Allah is. Therefore, it becomes important that if we want to know about Allah, that we know about Allah through the way He describes Himself to us, and which is why Allah's knowledge that He describes to us gives us an explanation that His adala is a characteristic of His knowledge. And those who refuse this characteristic are the ones who have separated themselves from truly knowing Allah, and which is why we incorporate this attribute in the description of our aqaid, to say that Tawheed cannot be separate from adala, and it needs to incorporate the concept of adala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This justice we mentioned yesterday as part of the Bill of Rights of Islam is one of those fundamentals of Islam, that it is the way that Islam is recognized, which is why Allah again describes in the Quran, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Certainly we sent our messengers with clear arguments and sent down with them the book and the balance, that men may conduct themselves with equity. When Allah describes that He wants humanity to behave with justice, then how can it be that Allah Himself is exempt from the attribute of justice? This explanation tells us that this justice cannot be ignored, and it has to be understood as a part of the religion of Islam. Which is why the discussion that we talk about when we look at the seerah of Ahlul Bayt and the attributes of Ahlul Bayt, you will never find them to behave without justice. Which is why when we look at the discussion about Karbala, Karbala is the entirety of justice that faces against the entirety of injustice. This discussion about Karbala and its justice, it doesn't begin on the day of Ashura. Rather, the attribute that justice was incorporated in this begins even before. Begins from the example of when the second Imam made peace with the Khalifa, with the usurper of the Khilafat. Imam Hassan, remember, after the Shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, possesses the Khilafat for 6 months. And when he then goes to war with Muawiyah, Muawiyah gives him a blank piece of paper and he says, if you abdicate to me the Khilafat, I will sign a treaty with any condition you want. Imam Hassan in that time signs the treaty and he gives the conditions, from amongst which was the condition that after your death, Muawiyah, you have no right to appoint a successor, and the Khilafat will return to me and my brother. That statement that Imam Hassan, that Muawiyah signed on, and said, I agree with this statement, was part of the reason why today when we talk about the event of Karbala, we don't say that Imam Hussain was in the search for power and authority. Rather, Imam Hussain was with justice, and the ones who wanted power and authority were the usurpers, and the truth of that authority stayed with the Ahlul Bayt. Every action the Imam takes is the manifestation of justice in society. Why? Look at how he leaves the city of Medina. Now when my Imam is to leave the city of Medina, he does not leave because he desires so, but rather he is forced into that condition. Which is why when he leaves in a state of oppression. There are 2 events that take place that they describe. One, that when Imam Hussain is being forced to give bay'ah to Mal'un Yazid, and he makes the decision to leave the city of Medina, he goes to visit the grave of his grandfather. And they describe and say that Abu Abdullah went to the grave of Rasulullah with authority, with weighted and heavy steps of one who moves with responsibility. and he sat by the grave of Rasulullah and he began to weep at the separation from Rasulullah, until such a condition came about that they said that he went into unconsciousness. In his dream he sees Rasulullah and he hugs his grandfather. And he says to him, Ya Rasulullah, why must I face these tribulations? Is it not possible that I could stay here with you for now? And Rasulullah replies, O my son Hussain, Allah has dictated for you such a lofty status in the hereafter that there is no way to achieve that status if it is not through the shahada that you will attain. When Abu Abdullah comes to conscience, they describe that from here he went to visit another grave. But this grave that he went to visit was not with the pomp and authority of a man who is held in responsibility and must enact the faith, but rather the way a child goes to visit his parent when they are injured. They describe and say that Abu Abdullah went as an injured child to the secret grave of his mother. And there he wept on the grave of his mother at his separation. Oh my mother Zahra, they separated you from me before. Now they are separating me from you and I must leave this place. Abu Abdullah bids farewell to his mother, but he is comforted to say that, oh my son Hussain, wherever you will go, your mother Zahra will be with you. Which is why they describe the nights before Ashura, when Abu Abdullah walked through the Maqtal, preparing the places of where the soldiers of his army would fall. They describe that Nafi ibn Hilal was the security guard of Abu Abdullah, and he followed Abu Abdullah the nights before Ashura. And Imam Hussain entered the Maqtal and the battlefield and began to remove stones from one place, thorns from another place. This Nafi turned and asked, Ya Abu Abdullah, what is this action you are performing? Abu Abdullah would reply and he say, Oh Nafi, this is the place where Habib will fall. I don't want there to be any stones on the ground where Habib will fall. This is where Muslim will fall. This is where my Akbar will come down from his horse. I am cleaning each of these places of Shahada so that there is no additional pain that they must bear other than the pain of Shahada. Nafi would say, Ya Abu Abdullah, I hear in the field of Karbala the weeping of a lady. Ya Abu Abdullah, what is this weeping that I hear? Everyone is busy in ibadah. Who is crying? Abu Abdullah would say, Nafi, pay no attention to the sound from the field of Karbala. Nafi waited some time, yet the crying continued, the weeping continued, until eventually he says, Ya Abu Abdullah, I ask you by your right to tell me that I am to protect you, but my heart is uncomfortable from this sound. Abu Abdullah replies and he says, Oh Nafi, that is my mother Zahra, who cleans my place of Shahada, as I have cleaned the places of Shahada of everyone else. My mother weeps for me in that condition. This land of Karbala is a place of weeping and difficulty. Today, the 2nd of Muharram, we commemorate when Abu Abdullah enters this land. This is that land that would make the Anbiya cry. They describe and say, when Amir al-Mu'mineen returned from one of the battles, they said, we saw Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he came to a barren land, throw himself from his horse, kiss the ground and begin to weep as he put his cheeks on the sands of the desert. We said, Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, what are you doing here? He says, huna qutila awladuna. This is the place where our women will be kept prisoners. This is the place where our children will be killed. This is the land of difficulties. Which is why it is no surprise that on the 2nd of Muharram, when Abu Abdullah asks, O Banu Asad, tell me the name of this place. The Banu Asad come and give many names until they gave the name of Karbala. As they gave this name, they said, one of the ladies from the Hamla came forward. Oh Abu Abdullah, when are we leaving this place? It makes my heart uncomfortable to be here. Oh Zainab, why are you uncomfortable in this place? She says, my heart has been trembling since we entered this land. When will we leave this place? Abu Abdullah would reply, we imagine, Oh Zainab, you will leave this place after you have seen my body trampled by horses. Oh Zainab, you will leave this place, but Hussein will remain. We have reached that place of difficulty that our father promised you about. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. We call out 10 times. يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد، يا أعلى بحق علي، يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept the small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the rights of Ali Muhammad, by the rights of the Quran, fulfill our hajat. There are those amongst our families and our communities that are suffering through sickness and disease. Give shifa'ah to our families, the community, the mu'mineen, wherever they are. Oh Allah, give aman to the mu'mineen, muslimeen, wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of the son of Zahra. Make us and our families from the supporters of Imam al-Zaman. Entitle us the ziyarat of Baba Abdullah in this world, the shafa'ah of Baba Abdullah in the hereafter. One surah Fatiha li arwah al-mu'mineen wal-mu'minat.